Everyone has an opinion and they want to be heard. Many years ago, the only way to do that was to talk to friends and family in the hopes that they would listen. For those who are more brave, they could write a letter to a newspaper in the hopes that it would be published for a wider audience. If they were published by the paper, then an editor would cut it to fit the length needed for a page. The pages themselves would be printed somewhere in the back of the news. It might gather some interest for the day, but almost immediately the paper would be delivered and forgotten with the next issue. Those who graduated from college might be able to write for a newspaper or publish in peer-reviewed journals. This increased the opportunity to be heard by more people, but it was still rather limited. With the invention of the internet, a person no longer has to rely on only friends and family or a very small local newspaper. When the internet became widespread, a whole new world opened up. Anyone who wanted to express their opinions could do so by writing a blog post, chatting in a room, or creating a podcast or video. That doesn't mean that it would reach a very large population, but it definitely increased that chance. Along with this democracy of ideas came a huge number of amateurs with very little formal education. For those who loved books and other media, that meant the ability to review whatever it is that they were interested in covering. Science and history topics did fairly well with interest and worthwhile content. Perhaps that is because these subjects need a lot of study and evaluation to come even close to acceptable. Movies and books only needed a one-time exposure for someone to form an opinion based on their likes and dislikes. This means a lot of reviews for them are not very deep or complicated, and there are a lot of people who do criticism or reviews online who miss the point of their purpose. There are some examples that can be used on how not to do reviews. Hello and welcome to NDM English. My name is Nate and these are my notes. Whatever the reviewer intends, there are some things that can be avoided for those who pay attention to what a review makes possible. Some come very close to achieving the goal of a review to express a new or interesting perspective. Others are so wide from the mark that they would need a complete change in order to be acceptable. For those who are included as examples, it should not be implied that they are at all bad people. It is the methods that will be examined to show what does and does not work for a proper review presentation. The most common mistake made by those who do not fully utilize the review end up rehearsing the story that they want to talk about. Outlining a story of material covered with a few opinions added is retelling. One of the most popular reviewers to do this is the Nostalgia Critic, who's known for his comedic approach to reviewing older movies. What he typically does is explain a movie from the start of the plot to the ending, with a few jokes to make some points. During that time that he says what goes on, he will throw in some exaggeration of the character or the events described. For a hypothetical example, a character might look up at the moon with wonderment and question where the love of their life might be at that very moment. Nostalgia Critic can take that and pretend that the character's howling at the moon like a wolf. The character doesn't actually do that in the movie. The Nostalgia Critic wants to make the point that the director stays too long on that one scene. At another point in this movie, there might be a lot of cuts from one viewpoint to another in editing of a scene. The Nostalgia Critic will cover his eyes and scream that his eyes are hurting. He wishes the movie would end right there in mercy. For him, that is a commentary on the unnecessary amount of cutting back and forth that makes it difficult to like what he's watching. He might repeat that joke a few times in the film whenever he sees that same editing style. Despite these occasional breaks that do little more than poke fun at the movie's expense, the majority of the time is spent explaining the plot. From the first scene to the last scene, the audience becomes familiar with the whole story. Once he's finished explaining the story, he then gets serious for the last minute. There are some comments about what works and perhaps why others might like the movie. A few truisms are mixed in with his own opinion, with very few examples from the movie that are used as evidence for what he's talking about. Now that part should be the main focus of a review, and not the last few moments. He is not alone in doing this, as more serious reviewers are known to follow this format. Morgan Richter seems like a very intelligent woman who knows a few things about movies and television. She does a series called Miami Vice, Changed Everything. It is about the 1980s cop drama based in Miami, Florida. They are a vice squad that primarily deals with the drug trade. Her videos start out with a quick one-sentence statement about what the episode will be about. It describes what will happen to a character or an important event. After that, she names the director and writers for the episode that she will be covering. From there, most of the video is her talking about the major plot points from beginning to end of that episode. She comes up with a few personal opinions and observations. Mixed in with that is pointing out music that has been included relevant to what is going on in the show. Other than a few bits of information here and there, those who are fans of Miami Vice will be bored by the rehearsal of the plot. For those who have not seen the show, it would be best for them to actually go back and watch the series for their own experience. At the end, after the plot is described, Morgan Richter then spends 2 or 3 minutes with some final thoughts. She explains what does or does not work in the episode, naming a few of her favorite moments. This is otherwise a well put together presentation, but it is not a solid method of a review. There are a lot of problems with reviews describing the plot while only adding a few additional comments. The most serious is coming near, if not crossing the line, into copyright infringement territory. These types of reviews acknowledge the fact that they don't own the rights. However, they come close to rewriting someone else's work. It is no wonder that there have been so many copyright infringement controversies in the online world. Some even take pictures and videos to arrange and cut them up, but in chronological order, similar to the reviewed product. Hoping to get away with this, some reviewers prominently explain or display the fair use policy in hopes of avoiding any takedowns. It is true the companies have gone beyond what is reasonable in their fight against infringement of the copyright. However, there are many instances where what a creator thinks is fair is actually not fair use. It isn't always clear-cut, but intentions are less important than what is actually done. In order to get past the copyright issues, some reviewers make a spoof or parody of what they wish to discuss. It can be fun to do spoofs or parodies, but that doesn't review the material. Again, the nostalgia critic is known for his elaborate sketches that highlight what he considers problems with movies that he doesn't think are that good. Him and his friends will get together in costume and reenact what they have seen, replacing the story with exaggerations and over-the-top jokes. In many instances, the characters and the story are changed for comedic purposes to such a degree that they can no longer be considered actual commentary. There seems to be 2 reasons why this started. The first is that his videos continually got taken down because of the large amounts of clips used in his reviews. The other reason is because he is a filmmaker who likes to do his own thing. This is his chance to make something unique with his own style, and still adhere to his reviewer persona. These can be fun and enjoyable, but they don't bring anything of value to a wider discussion about the movies. He does have some pretty good videos when he decides to review a group of movies, or ideas about movies, or anything that doesn't touch on only one. Arguably, he is a better film and television theorist than he is a reviewer of movies. You may not agree with his opinions, but at least he has serious discussions about general methods used for making movies. They can be worthy of consideration. That is because he expresses his ideas and then shows examples. There is something in them to either accept or counter with other examples that prove the opposite. Probably the reason they work the best is because there is a focus. He has a specific subject and he tries to stick with it through the entire discussion. He doesn't go off on a lot of unrelated and sometimes bizarre tangents. By not sticking with a distinct objective, every review can lead to a jumbled mass of confusion for the audience. Criticizing more than one work can be good background, but can easily lose focus from the main subject. An example of this is The Dave Cullen Show, that tries to review the Dune movie directed by David Lynch. It should be acknowledged that the director did not like what he ended up with for the public. His name was replaced by his request with Alan Smithy, a common placeholder for directors who are not satisfied with their work. The review starts out well, mentioning the well-made world building of the sets and designs. It doesn't take long for him to start talking about another movie by the same director, explaining how it is filled with confusing characters and a pretentious plot. The reviewer then goes on to talk about how Dune has those same problems. It ends up less about Dune and more about a dislike of the directing style of David Lynch. If this little description sounds typical of a review, remember that a lot of time is spent talking about a different movie than the main one. The best guess is that the reviewer is using Dune as part of his criticism of David Lynch as a director. If that is the case, then he misses out discussing other well-known works that showcase the director's abilities. He can still have a negative view of the director while bringing in those other movies. But that is a whole new subject than what it started out with. If he wanted to talk about Dune, then he should have used most of the time reviewing that movie. Only short examples from other movies were needed for evidence of his opinions on the one movie, Dune, that he wanted to talk about. In many ways, Morgan Richter's Miami Vice reviews have the same problem. Her titles for the reviews of the series promise to explain how the series changed television or the decade. Instead, what we get is what was described before. There's a retelling of the plots for each season and then a few pieces of observations and opinions. Almost none of the reviews explain how the show changed things. Every now and then she might mention the clothing or the music and what was different than what came before. As a whole, those moments are few and far between. It is not used as an overarching focus of the presentation. Those who might want to learn the details about how Miami Vice defined everything in a new way will be disappointed. The reviewer seems intelligent and knowledgeable, with a background that should allow her to share more. She just doesn't use the premise to its full potential. It is a missed opportunity that she continues in the videos about the X generation at the movies. There are some would-be reviewers who want to explain what they think would have worked in a story if done correctly. Coming up with ways to fix or saying what you would have done to improve the material is fan fiction. This has been proven to work in the past when there's actual engagement with the original work. It has to change enough to become its own creation. An example of this would be the Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rice. She took the scene in Jane Eyre about a madwoman stuck in an attic by her husband and wrote a book about how that happened. The story she wrote criticized that any man that would do that to a woman was cruel no matter what the reasons. It is also expressed that no matter what the husband might have believed brought her that madness, it came from a place of violence, both domestic and political. Her point was that there's always more to the story than what we are told. This attempt at review by fanfiction ended up a classic unto itself. More recently, there was the 50 Shades of Grey books that take on the Twilight vampire novels. The premise is, what would happen if the paranormal was stripped away and the characters did similar in the real world? Sadly, the review possibilities were thrown away in an adult series of books of similar questionable quality. If anything could be learned from it, it is that one does not have to be a vampire to take advantage of others. The same seduction of innocence would result in the same unequal power dynamic. The difference is, the author of 50 Shades of Grey didn't see a problem with that power, so long as there was a possibility of falling in love that existed. There are a few things that we can learn from the mistakes in these reviews. A review is not about retelling the story so that there can be some opinions and observations. That should be under the category among the social media subset community called reactions. Instead, the reviews should take the hint of the famous duo Siskel and Ebert that many people respect. They do not go through the whole story, but explain what a movie is about. They might show a clip given them by the studio for a visual example. The rest of their short time is discussing what they liked and didn't like about the movies that they are reviewing. They will talk about how well the actors did, how visually impressive or not was the filmography, and if the story itself was worth telling. They made sure to note examples, but nothing more. Due to the medium that they were on, it was not much time for them to say too much, beyond their surface impressions. You have to go and read their articles for a more in-depth review. Another good example would be James from Cinemassacre, who reviews an older movie, The Treasure of the Sierra Madres. He could have started with the introduction of the characters, explained the plot all the way to the end, and what happens. Instead, he sets up the plot up to the point where we know that this is a treasure hunt. He skips the rest and shows only a few scenes to explain how they work within the movie. As an example, he picks out one of the main characters who gets in a fight because he wants to get paid. Once he grabs the money after the fight, he gives part of that money back. That explains that the character is not greedy so much as simply wants what he should be getting for the work that he does. The rest of the review is him taking scenes from the movie and explaining how it works. He will talk about the black and white filming increasing the tension as they get closer to finding a treasure. At no time does he give away so much of the story that if we were to watch the movie, it would be as if we had already seen it. He implies that the ending is not like what you'd expect from a Hollywood film, while not giving it away. The purpose of a review is to explain if the work is worthy of its creation, and if it is, what makes it worth sharing with others. Question for consideration. What do you think makes a successful social media reviewer? Click the subscribe button and notification bell to not miss the next installments and analysis.